my name's John, and this video is a first-person patient perspective of a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. The medical professionals like to abbreviate to a LaPiChole, but probably more commonly known as a keyhole surgery gallbladder removal. I'm making this video because going into the operation I was nervous. I think probably most people going into surgery are nervous, and I know the last 2 times before this that I've had surgery I was as well, but for some reason this felt a little different to me and I was struggling to figure out why, so I was looking for videos of other people who'd gone through the procedure to sort of get a handle on what to expect. I think probably in hindsight, at least part of the reason for this being a little different to me was this is an organ removal. So the other 2 operations I had were just correcting things. I had a operation on my spine in 2004, which I had some amazing retrograde amnesia, and anterograde amnesia as well, but I'll get to that in a little while. But for the one that I had a couple of years ago was for FES, a functional endoscopic sinus surgery. It was to remove a mushroom from my nose. It was a fungal sinus ball or something that they had to do, and while they were there they did a correction of my deviated septum. But and that operation, the anesthetic was completely fine. I had no troubles at all with that one. This one definitely was somewhere in between those 2, but I think the biggest thing for me is that this is an organ removal, and as such it feels a little different, because with the other ones, I mean, if you go in and maybe they don't quite get it right, they can just come back and tweak it a bit, but with this one, like, the organ's gone. It's not coming back. So it's very much a one-way thing, and I think that was part of the anxiety for me. But yeah, I talked to some friends who've had the operation and everybody reported just wildly different experiences, which was not encouraging. I know one of them seemed to think that the pain they got in their stomach was from the inflation and gas that they use during the operation. And I mean, I can see that. There's definitely an element of that, but that also wasn't my experience. Another person they said that they had an operation that involved an initial problem with their ducts itself, and then once they'd recovered from that, a few months later they went and actually had the gallbladder removal. And in their case they said that the weirdest symptom for them was their organs felt like they were sticking together when they moved, which again, yeah, not my experience at all. I did find a lovely guy who did a video on his surgery, and he did kind of like an update every day, and I was thinking of doing that, but 2 things. One was his video just went on too long, and 2, I think which of course is something I'm going to be guilty of here as well, but I think also a lot of his stuff was based on, I think it should be good, and then the next update the next day was correcting that. And I think I'm post-op day 6 now, so I think I haven't quite finished 6 days, but I'm nearly there. So I think probably now's a good time to do it, especially since I was back at work yesterday, although obviously on very light duties, and also against the advice of my surgeon who said to be off for a week. But anyway, so yeah, I think my experience with it was, firstly, the anesthetic wasn't quite as good as the experience I had with the sinus surgery, but it was also pretty good. So my big problem that I had with my 2004 surgery was when I went under the anesthetic, I don't have any memory leading up to that. I remember being in the waiting room before going into surgery. The anaesthetist had come and seen me and put a cannula in, but no medicine. And then they left me, and I was there with some blankets because I was cold. And the next memory I have was, this was about 7 in the morning. The next memory I have was at 8 p.m. that night. Someone was spoon feeding me lasagna. According to my medical chart, they've been asking me questions and administering drugs for pain relief and stuff all afternoon, but I have no memory of any of that. And to be honest, that memory from that night's quite hazy. My first really solid memory was the next morning. I was also in a lot of pain with that operation. Like, they told me I'd be out of hospital the next day and would be playing tennis in 2 weeks, but Realistically, it took me 2 days before I was able to get out of bed in hospital. And then they wheeled me to the car and had an exquisitely painful ride home. And then 2 weeks later, I was able to kind of get out of bed at home, but still in a lot of pain. So that was not a great operation. And then I think probably the first one was really good because I remember them giving me the meds that actually to put me to sleep, and I felt extremely woozy. And I said, I think they were a bit surprised I was still awake. And I said, am I able to go to sleep now? And they went, yes. And then I went, and then the next memory I have is very clearly sitting up as they were like waking me up going, all right, Johnny, you awake? And I was like, oh yes, I'm back. And I was looking up at the time going, oh, I've only been out for 2 hours. And they were kind of surprised I was so lucid. No memory of the operation and no pain, which was fantastic. They gave me a really strong painkiller anyway, but it just made me feel floaty. I really didn't need it. And once it wore off, I didn't even have Panadol because, to be honest, I wasn't in any pain from that operation. This one was different. I went into the surgery, and the last thing I remember, so I remember meeting the anesthetic team, and they were lovely as always. Like, anesthetists are my favorite doctors because they're super chill and they know they're giving you happy drugs. But I remember talking to them, and I remember they gave me the calm down medicine, the one I think she jokingly referred to it as like a little glass of champagne. And I do remember that, and yes, it did make me calmer. I was anxious, but not, I wasn't freaking out or anything. And, but that was nice. And then I remember them wheeling me into the room, and I remember them putting the beds together and locking it in place. I nearly moved across before they locked it. I was like, oh, hang on, wait a second. And then they got me onto the actual operating table. And then I've got like a brief gap in memory, but I do remember them, some guy had a mask and he said, this is just oxygen. And I'm like, sure. And he's put it over my face, and it was kind of annoying because I've got a CPAP mask and this one was clearly leaking gas and it was driving me nuts. And so I kept going, it needs to be, and he's like, no. And I'm like, all right, there's clearly something going on. They just don't want to tell me. So I remember that, and then I remember breathing for that for a while, and then I just remember thinking, well, this is taking forever. I'm just going to zone out. And then the next memory I have is clearly the surgery was over. I think it was only probably 2 hours later. It would have been under 2 hours just. And the memory I have is just feeling extremely groggy. Like, you come out of like a really deep sleep and someone's waking you up and you're like, oh, can you just go away? I want to sleep. But at the same time, I was also like, oh my goodness, I've got the worst stomach ache ever. And I was like moaning because it was so painful. And I remember them kind of talking in the background about, oh, we better give him some, I think it was, it's basically oxycodone, but I can't think of the name of it. It starts with a D. And they gave me a shot of that, and I remember thinking, oh, it took the edge off a little bit, but it was still really painful, and I was just kind of moaning and drifting in and out of sleep. And I think in hindsight at the time, I was just wishing they'd go away and that the pain would stop. But in hindsight, I can remember hearing them feeling a little bit, I got the sense they were a little bit concerned about the level of pain I was in, because they ended up maxing out whatever drug it was they were giving me. And then I remember them thinking, well, what do we do now? Like, he's on the maximum dose. So then I think they added tramadol, and between the two of them, again, it's hazy, so, but between the two of them, it did actually get the pain under control enough for them to move me to the ward. So I remember them wheeling me into the elevator, which was quite a bump and it hurt. And then I actually remember feeling the acceleration of the elevator as it went up a floor or two, and or maybe down, I don't remember exactly what direction it was going, but I remember the acceleration, and I remember thinking, oof, that's a bit too. And then I got to the ward, and honestly, I was fine. I was expecting, and I think I was worried about the pain in the gallbladder, because I was quite lucky in that my gallbladder problem was I had a single very large stone, which was too large to get into the duct, so I was spared a lot of that really painful gallbladder colic that a lot of patients get when they have to have a gallbladder removal. But for me, it hurt a lot sometimes when I caught it at the wrong angle, or if I'd been overstressing it, it would hurt, and then it would kind of ache for a week or two. But I was mostly okay, so I was really worried that this was going to actually make it worse. But in hindsight, and everybody has basically said this too, you don't tend to get a lot of pain from the gallbladder after this surgery. So that was a relief, and yeah. I do remember going in, one of the nurses told me that a really common symptom that people get is shoulder pain. And I've had that before for other reasons, but I kind of knew what to expect. And coming out of it, I did actually get a little bit of that. She seemed to think that it's maybe a few hours to maybe a day at most. For me, I think it was about 45 minutes, and it was very mild compared to my stomach pain. So that wasn't really an issue. But yeah, the actual operation itself went great. The doctor said everything went smoothly, so there's no real complications to contend with there. But yeah, it was just very painful on the stomach, and it was probably, like, I did manage to get out of bed later that evening, but it was very painful to get in and out of bed. And I had a couple more shots of that oxycodone, I think probably about 9 p.m. and then I think probably about 2 or 3 p.m. Sorry, 2 or 3 a.m. And I do know at about midnight, after, that was the other weird thing, like everyone's telling me about, oh, after you come out of this operation, your diet's going to be hugely changed, and it's, you can't have fats or sugary foods, and it's going to be a real painful experience if you do. And then like the first meal they gave me like 3 hours post-op was like roast beef with, they had this amazing souffle custard thing with, it was just full of fat and delicious, and I had no problems. I chewed it very slowly because I was very nervous about triggering any issues, but honestly, needn't have worried. It was fine. And lunch the next day, they had sticky date pudding, and breakfast was like full cream milk, and oh man, it was hilarious. But no, it was really good. But yeah, I remember at midnight, I think I did actually eat most of my roast meal, but at midnight I kind of got peckish, and it was kind of keeping me up. And so I actually went and asked the nurses, and they were really nice and let me raid their biscuit tin. So I had some biscuits at midnight, and that actually settled me enough to sleep. So that was good. Although, as I said, probably 3 hours later I was up because the pain in my stomach was getting worse, and they gave me the meds. But yeah, so that was kind of my experience of the actual operation. The next morning itself, I was starting to feel a lot better. I'd had a lovely visit from my family the night before too, and I was a little bit floaty from the meds, but they were really nice about it all. And my daughter was super concerned, and she brought up a lovely little picture, which was lovely to have next to me. But yeah, the next morning was good. There was an earthquake. We live in a very, very seismically inactive country, and I live in the state that's the least, or one of the least seismically active in that country. And we had, I think, the largest onshore earthquake in 150 years, and it was just north of where I am here in Brisbane. And it was not very big, let's be honest. It's a 5.6, which for Australia, to put that in comparison, there was a 5.6 magnitude earthquake in the 80s in Newcastle, which tragically lost, I think, about 13 lives or something like that. And yeah, a lot of damage. But this one was thankfully way out in the bush. So by the time it got to most places where people lived, it was quite mild. I think people up on the Sunshine Coast a bit north of here and closer had there's some footage of people's houses shaking quite a bit. But I don't think there was any real damage anywhere. And obviously nobody was hurt, which was great. But yeah, I was actually asleep at the time, and I remember the bed kind of rocking, and I was like, what, is somebody waking me up to do observations? And I kind of sat up and looked around, and I was like, no, what's going on? And then I looked over at my side table, and the water jug was like sloshing, and I'm like, oh wait, I've been to New Zealand, I know what this is, it's an earthquake. And I was telling everyone in the room, and they're all like, really? I'm like, yeah, bring up my phone, and like, yeah, sure enough, there's messages everywhere already starting to come in that it was magnitude 5. Well, at the time they said 5.2, but they revised it to 5.6 later. So yeah, that was a fun little addendum to the morning. But then, yeah, that day I was kind of ready to try and get out in the morning, but in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't, because I was still pretty sore. But by the afternoon, by the time the doctor had seen me, they'd done all the discharge, got my scripts for pain meds and things. I think it was late after, or mid to late afternoon by the time I actually got out. And I was fine. I just went home. My mum picked me up, dropped me back to my place. And yeah, I just kind of rested. I was actually doing pretty well. Still very sore in the stomach, and it was very painful to get up and kind of shift around, but it was fine. And then, yeah, I would say probably so that was the Saturday after the Friday op. And then the Sunday was similarish, just not quite as sore. And I'd sort of tapered off having to have pain meds. I was probably having them maybe every 12 hours by then. And then I think I had another one that night, but then I didn't actually have any pain meds on the Monday. So it was sore, but it was manageable. And then I think for Monday night and Tuesday night, it was mostly just, at night, just to help me sleep, because it was quite uncomfortable to get roll over. I sleep on my side, but that was actually quite a painful position, and I really struggled to sleep on my back, and I ended up having to for quite a while, which was, not gonna lie, that wasn't fun. And I was quite tired, I think, for those first few days, because I just really struggled to sleep. But I'm able to sleep on my left side now. Right side's still a bit of a challenge. Every time I go over there, I get a little bit of a mild colic pain, and I just don't want to risk it yet. So it's still a little bit messed up. But I mean, to be fair, before the operation, I was mostly sleeping on my left side as well, with the right side was always a bit dangerous. You could quite easily trigger the really serious colic pain that involuntarily flipped you back on your back. So not a huge difference there either, I guess. But yeah, I think, as I said, I was back at work yesterday. I was a little bit ginger and slow, and I mean, I do computer work, so it's mostly just at a desk. But I'm going back today. I've just finished dropping my daughter off to school, and I'm up in the forest on the way into work, and I just thought I'd do this quick video. But although now that I look at it, it's nearly 16 minutes long. But yeah, I think overall, not as bad as I was worrying about for the surgery. Diet change has been almost non-existent. The very first meal that I got after hospital was, my daughter wanted KFC, so we had greasy chicken and chips, and yeah, no problems again. In terms of digestively, no real change. If anything, it's actually better than it was before the operation. I always had a very upset stomach, and since the operation, I mean, I wouldn't say it's completely fixed, but it's definitely a lot better. It's more regular, it's less not great, and yeah, I think overall that is also something that I didn't need to worry about. So yeah, 5 stars, would do again, but do be prepared for that couple of days at least of being quite uncomfortable and tired. Which I think a lot of people say that. They do say, oh yeah, it's a couple of days of being a bit rough, and then for the rest of that week, you just, you're a bit ginger. And I think I'm kind of dealing with that. So, but yeah, overall, probably wouldn't have worried as much if I'd known that. So I hope this video is helpful to anybody who might be about to go into that operation and is looking for the patient perspective. But I think overall, I mean, you kind of know going into these things, there's millions of them being done all the time. So, if it was really that serious, there'd be all these people complaining in support groups. So I think it's fine. Obviously everybody's different. After I actually talked to some of my friends who'd had this and explained my pain and showed them scars and stuff, they were like, yeah, that's pretty similar to me. So I think actually that stomach pain, I have a very big incision near my belly button, which I understand is where they put the camera, and also possibly where well, I thought that might have been where they took the gallbladder out, but I've seen videos online where they take it out through the incision up near the liver. But I probably should have explained that too. There's actually 4 incisions they make for a keyhole or laparoscopic surgery. There's the big one near your belly button, which is, I think in my case, it was probably, I mean, I'm gonna guess that it was maybe in the kind of 5 centimeter range. Probably not quite that big, but it was big. It completely wrapped around like a big semicircle. And then there's 3 other smaller incisions. There's one up near your liver, up about here. And then there's a couple more kind of down here and here. So there's sort of like the 3 there. They're extremely small, and honestly, they haven't hurt at all the whole time. And they're healing up really well. But yeah, the belly button one's still a bit sore for me. But yeah, having talked to my friends, I think they are also kind of describing the same thing. Like the guy that said that, I felt like my stomach was inflated from the gas. I think it probably referred pain for him as well. And then the other guy with the organs moving, I think that was probably also similar. At least, everybody experiences it differently, and of course every cut's different and every body's different, but I think loosely that's the thing. You're going to have that aching for at least a few days, and then the rest of the week it's going to be a bit sore. So yeah, that's my experience. Good luck for your surgery if you're going in for one. But yeah, I think my biggest message would be it's not that bad. You're just going to definitely have to block out a week where 2 days are going to be pretty miserable, but manageable. And then the rest of the week you're going to just be a little bit sore. And yeah, I was told no heavy lifting for 6 weeks, so my daughter's going to be very upset about not being picked up, but it's life. All right, well, good luck. Thanks for watching.